The day I came home, I stopped for gas about 20 minutes from my street. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything look flatter than it is. I stood there with one hand on the pump, listening to the slow click of the meter and the traffic from the road behind me. Somebody across the lot had country music playing too low to make out the words. I remember thinking about ordinary things. Whether my daughter would still leave her shoes by the door after I told her not to. Whether my son had gotten any better at throwing a baseball. Whether my wife, Lauren, would still keep cinnamon candles in the kitchen even though she knew the smell gave me a headache. I had been gone just over a year. Long enough for home to become something I pictured more than something I remembered clearly. I wasn't expecting perfection. I wasn't expecting some movie scene either. I just wanted to walk in, set my bag down, and hear familiar voices again. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was how still everything was. No bikes in the yard, no chalk on the walkway, no dog barking next door and setting off hours. Just the soft ticking of my engine after I shut it off. I sat there for a second with both hands on the steering wheel. Then I got out and walked to the front door. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not bad, just empty. No detergent, no food, no trace of the life that had been there before I left. My duffel slipped off my shoulder and hit the hardwood with a dull sound that carried farther than it should have. I stood in the entryway and listened. Nothing. I checked the living room first, then the kitchen, then upstairs. The walls looked bare in places where family photos used to hang. My son's drawings were gone from the refrigerator. The hall closet was almost empty. In the bedroom, half the hangers were missing, and the dresser drawers were cleaned out so neatly it looked less like moving and more like a decision made weeks ago. I didn't say anything. There was nobody there to say it to. I went back downstairs and found one glass in the sink. That was all. A minute later, there was a knock at the door. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, from 2 houses down, early 70s. Always in a cardigan no matter the weather, the kind of person who watered her flowers before sunrise and noticed everything without acting like she did. She held an envelope in both hands. When she looked at me, her face changed in a way that told me she had been carrying something she didn't want to carry. "I'm sorry, Ben," she said. That was all at first. Just that. Then she held out the envelope and added, "She told me to give you this when you got back. She made me promise not to call." I took it and thanked her. My voice sounded normal. I was glad for that. The envelope had my name written across the front in Lauren's handwriting. I opened it right there in the doorway. The note was short, just a few lines. She said she had moved on. Said the kids were better off without me. Said they were tired of waiting around for a man who always chose work over his family. Then one last line, clean and deliberate. "They don't want to see you. Don't try to find us." Mrs. Donnelly was still standing there, watching my face carefully, like she expected something to break. Instead, I folded the note once and slipped it back into the envelope. She lowered her voice. A man had been coming around for a while. Nice SUV, pressed shirts, too polished for this neighborhood. I didn't interrupt. "He started showing up maybe 3 months after you left," she said. "Then about 10 days ago, they loaded a moving truck. The children were upset. Your boy especially. He kept saying he wanted to wait. For the first time since I stepped into the house, something in me settled. Not relief. Not anger either. Just a kind of stillness." I thanked her again. She touched my forearm once, lightly, then headed back toward her porch. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen with the envelope in my hand. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower started up and then faded again. Through the back window, I could see the fence line, the corner of the old grill, the maple tree my son used to climb when he thought nobody was looking. I set the envelope on the counter. Then I opened the cabinet above the stove and found a bottle of bourbon with maybe 2 inches left in it. Lauren used to complain if I had a drink after a long week. Said it made the house feel tense. I poured a little into a glass anyway, mostly for the motion of it, and set it down beside the sink. I didn't touch it. I pulled out my phone and made one call. Not to Lauren, to Daniel Reyes. Danny and I had served together years earlier. He'd left the army before I did and somehow turned his patience into a business. These days he did private investigative work out of Columbus, mostly insurance fraud, custody issues, missing persons. He answered on the second ring. "You home?" he asked. "Yes." A pause. Then bad. "Yes." He let that sit for a moment. "What do you need?" I looked around the kitchen while I answered. The empty counter. The magnets gone from the fridge. One of the chair legs had a scuff mark from where my daughter used to rock backward during dinner even after being told not to. I need to know who she left with, I said, and where my kids slept last night. Danny didn't ask anything else. He just said, send me her full name again, and anyone you already suspect. I gave him the name I had, Marcus Hale. It had come from Mrs. Donnelly's careful way of saying that man, without pretending she didn't know more. She told me she'd heard Lauren say it once at the mailbox. Marcus. I sent Danny the details, then put the phone face down. Then I waited. The waiting was the familiar part. People think military work teaches you action. Sometimes it does. Mostly it teaches you what to do with time while nothing appears to be happening. How to sit still and keep your thoughts from running ahead of facts. I went room by room again, slower this time. In my daughter's room, the curtains were gone, and the late sun fell straight through the window, hard and flat across the floor. There was a faint square on the wall where a bookshelf used to stand. In my son's room, one baseball card had been missed. It was under the edge of the radiator, bent slightly at one corner. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand for a few seconds before sliding it into my pocket. In the primary bedroom, Lauren had taken almost everything except one winter scarf draped over a closet shelf and an old pharmacy receipt tucked behind the dresser. I crouched to pick it up. The receipt was from a town about an hour and 20 minutes north of us, dated 6 days earlier. I folded that and put it in my pocket too. Back downstairs, I opened the junk drawer. Most of the paper clutter was gone, but there were a few loose items left behind. A takeout menu, 2 dead batteries, a school pickup form with my son's old classroom listed on top. On the back, written in blue pen, was a phone number I didn't recognize. No name, just a number. I wrote it down. Outside, evening was starting to settle in. The kitchen window over the sink reflected the room back at me, dimmer now. I finally took one sip of the bourbon and set the glass aside for good. At 8:14, Danny called. I have something, he said. I grabbed a pen, though I already knew I wouldn't need it. There's a Marcus Hale, 43, he said. Medical device sales. Divorced twice. Clean on paper, not so clean off it. Been connected to at least 2 married women during long work separations. One spouse was overseas. Another traveled for pipeline work. He doesn't force doors open. He waits until they're already cracked. I said nothing. Danny continued. There's more. Your wife's bank card hit a grocery store and gas station near a lake property outside Broward County. Cabin is owned by her sister, Elise. You ever been there? Yes, I said. I had. I taught my son how to cast a line off that dock 3 summers earlier. My daughter caught a sunfish there and carried it around in a bucket for half an hour because she wanted to keep it as a pet. The cabin had cedar walls and a screened porch and a loose board near the back steps that popped every time someone put weight on it. Danny gave me the address anyway. Then he said, Ben, listen to me. Don't drive out there angry. I'm not angry. Another pause. He knew me long enough to hear the truth in that. What are you then? I looked at the envelope on the counter, at the folded note, at the house that no longer looked like mine except in structure. Clear, I said. He exhaled softly. All right. Step 1, don't make contact tonight. Step 2, let me pull property records, phones, and vehicle information. Step 3, tomorrow morning you decide with facts, not guesses. I wrote those down on the back of the takeout menu even though I'd already repeated them in my head. Step 1, no contact. Step 2, get records. Step 3, move with facts. That was enough for one night. After we hung up, I locked the front door, turned off the kitchen light, and sat at the dining room table with only the lamp over the stove on. The house made all its nighttime sounds around me. Wood settling, a distant car passing, wind brushing the branches against the back fence. At 9:03, my phone lit up with a message from Danny. A photo attachment first, then a second, then a short line beneath them. Confirmed. Silver SUV. Broward County address. Children visible in upstairs window around 7:40 p.m. More in the morning. I opened the first photo and looked at it for a long time. Then I set the phone face down, and I waited. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset in the way people usually mean. It was more that my mind had shifted into a different kind of attention. I sat at the dining room table until after midnight with the lamp on, the rest of the house dark around me, and sorted what I actually knew from what I had only been told. Lauren had left. The children had gone with her. They had not left willingly, at least not fully. And somewhere north of town, At her sister Elisa's cabin, there was now a man named Marcus Hale moving around inside a place where my family had once spent quiet weekends. I made 2 columns on the back of an old school calendar I found in the drawer. Known. Unconfirmed. I kept the list short. Facts only. No interpretation. No adjectives. Then I waited for daylight. At 6:12 the next morning, I made coffee in a kitchen that no longer held any signs of routine. No cereal boxes. No lunch containers drying by the sink. No notes on the refrigerator. Just a bare counter, a plain mug, and the smell of coffee moving into cold air. The first real light came through the back windows a few minutes later. Thin and gray. I stood there and looked out at the yard while the coffee cooled in my hand. I thought about my son's baseball card still in my pocket. Then my phone rang. "Danny, I pulled the property records," he said. "Cabin is in Elise Mercer's name. Paid off. No liens. Utility activity has spiked in the last 2 weeks. Someone's definitely living there." I took a pen from the drawer and wrote while he talked. I also got partial phone records off a civil contact source. Not content. Just patterns. Lauren and Marcus had regular contact for months. Billy by the end. There's also a school transfer inquiry from Bryan County. That made me stop writing for a second. For both kids? Yes. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "All right," I said. "What else?" "Your wife stopped using the joint checking account 6 weeks ago except for small amounts. She's been moving through cash and a separate card. That usually means one of 2 things. Either somebody told her to, or she didn't want a clean trail." He paused. "And Ben, I found something else. There was a pharmacy pickup in Bryan County under your daughter's name. Antibiotics. 3 days ago. So the kids are definitely there." I thanked him. He knew I meant it. Before hanging up, he said, "You need an attorney before you need a confrontation." I know. No, I mean before anything else. Before phone calls. Before showing up. Before letting them know you're back. I said I know. He let that go. "I'll send you a summary in 10 minutes. When the call ended, I poured the coffee into the sink, showered, put on clean jeans and a plain button-down, and drove downtown. I already knew who I was going to see. Owen Mercer had handled my parents' estate work years earlier, but family law wasn't his field. The person I needed was someone he used to mention whenever military custody issues came up in conversation. A woman named Carla Sutton. Former military legal office. Direct. Organized. Quiet in the way serious people usually are. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building above a tax preparer and a dentist. The waiting room smelled faintly like paper and lemon cleaner. A receptionist with reading glasses hanging from a chain looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" "I'm hoping Miss Sutton has time for something urgent." She studied my face for half a second, then asked my name. When I gave it, something in her expression shifted. Not recognition exactly, more that she understood the tone of the request. She just got in. Let me ask. A minute later, I was in Carla Sutton's office. She stood when I entered, shook my hand once, and motioned me toward a chair without wasting time on soft introductions. Her desk was clear except for a legal pad, a computer monitor, and a ceramic cup full of sharpened pencils. No framed slogans. No decorative law books. Just order. "What happened?" she asked. I handed her the envelope first, then the note, then the pharmacy receipt, the school form, and my written notes from Danny's call. She read everything in silence. The office was so still I could hear a copy machine running faintly somewhere down the hall. When she finished, she folded the note carefully and set it on top of the pile. "How long were you deployed?" 14 months. "Did you request an extension?" "No." "Any history of abuse, protective orders, police calls, substance issues, or mental health holds?" "No." "Has she ever threatened to leave with the children before?" "Not directly." Carla nodded once and made a few notes of her own. Then she looked up and said, "All right. First, don't go to that cabin. Second, don't call her yet. Third, I need copies of your service records, your return orders, your communication history with the children, and any evidence that contradicts what she told them." I listened. She went on in the same even tone. "If she's been telling the children you chose duty over them, and you have documentation showing you tried to come home sooner, that matters. If she moved them without proper notice and is already exploring school changes, that matters. If another adult is involved in cutting off contact, that matters too." She slid a legal pad toward me and wrote 3 lines. 1. Preserve evidence. 2. Establish timeline. 3. Secure the children lawfully. I looked at the page and nodded. That was close enough to how I already thought that I knew I could work with her. Can you file today? I asked. I can start today, she said. Whether we file today depends on what we can document by noon. Then she asked me for every detail I could remember from the last 6 months before deployment ended. Calls, messages, shifts in tone, any missed visits over video, anything that felt off at the time and made more sense now. So I gave it to her. I told her about the way Lauren had started ending calls early near the end, how she once said the kids were busy and didn't come to the screen for 3 straight Sundays, how my son had seemed distracted the last time we talked alone, like he wanted to say something but had already been warned not to, how Lauren told me, about 5 weeks before I returned, that maybe the kids needed more stability than military life could give. I hadn't liked that line then. I liked it less now. Carla wrote with quick, controlled strokes. When I finished, she said, "Good. Now tell me about you." That question took me a second. She saw that and clarified. Not your biography. Your patterns. Routine. Conduct. Who picks up children from school when you're home? Who handles medical appointments? Homework. Meals. Bedtime. I need the daily truth, not the flattering version. So I told her that too. That I did school drop-offs when I was stateside because I liked the quiet drive. That my daughter wanted me to read at bedtime even after she could read on her own. That my son still came to me when he was worried about tests, even though he acted like he didn't need anyone. That I handled most weekend cooking because Lauren hated grocery stores and I didn't mind them. That I was the one who kept the family calendar on the wall by the pantry. Normal things. Useful things. Real things. Carla finally leaned back and folded her hands. You present well, she said. That helps less than people think. What helps is specificity. Judges notice when a parent knows the shape of the children's days. I nodded. She turned to her printer, copied the documents, and gave the originals back to me in a neat stack. Then she said, "You have one more job this morning. Go home and gather every record showing you were trying to return to your family, not avoid them. Emails, leave requests, text messages, photographs, school contact forms, anything with dates. Bring them back by 11. I stood. At the door she added, "And one more thing." I looked back. If she calls, answer once. Be calm. Say you're home. Ask where the children are. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Don't fill silence. All right. After that, no more direct contact. Let the paper do the talking. Outside, the morning had warmed a little. A delivery truck was backing into the alley, and somebody across the street was unlocking a storefront gate. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in city dust, coffee, and exhaust, and then drove back to the house. I spent the next 2 hours gathering records, deployment orders, return orders, emails to my command asking whether my rotation home could be moved forward, a message thread where I told Lauren I had turned down a training opportunity because it would add weeks to my time away, video call screenshots, birthday gift receipts, copies of letters I had written to the kids that Lauren had told me she gave them. By 10:47, I had a folder thick enough that it needed a binder clip. Then, while I was checking an old laptop for archived email, my phone buzzed. Lauren. I looked at the screen for one full ring before answering. Hello. Silence first. Then her voice. You're back. Yes. A short pause. You weren't supposed to come in until tomorrow. That line told me more than anything else she could have said. My orders changed, I said. Where are the kids? You can't just show up and start demanding things. I asked where they are. They're safe. I sat down slowly at the desk in what used to be our shared office. Dust had settled in a pale line along the printer tray. Outside the window, a squirrel moved along the fence top and disappeared. Let me talk to them, I said. They're upset. Let me talk to them. Another silence. Then, Ben, this is hard enough already. I didn't respond. That seemed to unsettle her more than anything. Finally, she said, they need time. I've explained things in a way they can understand. I wrote that sentence down word for word on a legal pad. What did you explain? I asked. That you weren't coming back to live with us. I let that sit. Then I said, that wasn't yours to decide. Her voice sharpened. You were never really here, even when you were. The kids need consistency. They need a normal life. Let me talk to my children. You'll just confuse them. I wrote that down too. Then I said, I'm not discussing this with you anymore. My attorney will be in touch. She inhaled sharply at that. You got a lawyer already? Yes. Wow. Her voice changed there. Less certain. More careful. Then she said something I remembered for a long time after. Marcus is more stable than you are, Ben. He actually shows up. I looked at the deployment photos stacked beside the computer. The ones I had packed away before leaving. Men I'd worked beside. Places I didn't talk much about. Months spent counting down to home in a way nobody outside that world ever fully understands. When I answered, my voice stayed even. I showed up today. Then I ended the call. I wrote the time down. 10:58 a.m. After that, I put the phone face down and carried the folder back to Carla Sutton's office. She was in a conference room when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, reviewing something on a yellow pad. Her receptionist took the folder, then Carla came out herself a minute later and brought me in. She went through the records fast, but not carelessly. At one point, she stopped on an email where I had written to my unit administrator. If there is any way to move my return forward even by 10 days, I would like to take it. My son's school year ends soon, and I promised I'd be back before then. She tapped the date. This is useful. Then she asked, did you record the call? No, that's fine. Your notes right after are still worth something. She took my legal pad page, read the quoted lines, and made another note. Here's what we have by early afternoon, she said. Potential custodial interference. Possible relocation without proper notice. Evidence of intentional misrepresentation to the children. A romantic partner involved in the household. And documentation that contradicts her story. She looked at me squarely. That is enough to move. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Just direction. Carla began laying things out in order. Emergency filing. Temporary restrictions on removing the children again. A request for immediate contact. A demand for disclosure of their location. Potential hearing within 24 to 48 hours if the court moved quickly. She spoke in calm steps, and I followed each one. By the time she finished, the legal pad in front of her held a timeline, so clean it looked almost simple. Life never is. But paperwork can be. At 1:34 p.m., she sent a clerk downstairs with the initial filing packet. Then she looked at me and said, now we wait to see how she responds to process. I asked, what if she runs? She may try, Carla said. But people who believe they're in control usually wait one move too long. I sat back in the chair and looked at the closed conference room door. There was no sound from the hallway now, just the low hum of the building and the soft tapping of Carla's keyboard as she drafted the next notice. At 2:07, my phone lit up again. This time it was Danny. I answered. He didn't waste words. I have current photos from the cabin, he said. Marcus's SUV is there. Lauren's car too. Kids confirmed. Also, there's something you need to see. Sending it now. A second later, 3 images came through. The first showed Lauren on the porch, holding a mug, looking out toward the lake. The second showed Marcus carrying grocery bags through the front door like he'd lived there for years. The third stopped me. It was my son in the upstairs window. Not waving, not smiling, just standing there with one hand against the glass. Then another message came through under the photos. Your daughter appears to be sick. Child-sized prescription bag seen on kitchen counter. Also got partial audio from an outdoor device. Marcus said, he'll believe whatever we tell him if he even bothers to look. I read that line once, then again, and across the table, Carla looked up from her keyboard and saw my face change just enough to notice. What is it? She asked. I handed her the phone. She read the message, set the phone down carefully, and reached for a fresh legal pad. Then she said, very calmly, all right. This just became more urgent. And for the first time that day, the room went completely quiet. Carla read the message twice, then set my phone beside her legal pad. She didn't react much on her face. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. She never borrowed trouble before it arrived, and she never wasted energy on performance. What's the source? She asked. Private investigator I trust. Can he document chain of custody for what he collected? Yes. She nodded once. Good. Then she drew a line down the center of the page and wrote 2 headings. Immediate legal use. Hold for later. That was how the afternoon changed. Up to that point, I had still been dealing with absence. Missing people. Missing information. A note on a kitchen counter. A half-empty house. Now I had something more useful than outrage. I had a timeline. Carla started placing each piece where it belonged. The note Lauren left behind. The school transfer inquiry in Bryan County. The pharmacy receipt. My deployment records showing I had tried to return sooner, not later. The phone call where she said she had explained things to the children. The investigator's confirmation that Marcus was staying at the cabin. And now the partial audio from outside the house. Enough to show somebody there was already shaping the story before I had even made contact. What can the court act on fastest? I asked. She answered without looking up. Interference with parental access. Relocation issues. Misrepresentation to the children if we can support it. And the fact that there's a third party in the home complicating everything. She tapped the pen against the page once. Especially if the third party is participating. At 2:26, Danny emailed over a clean written summary, time-stamped photos, and a short affidavit draft. Carla printed everything. The warm paper slid into the tray one page at a time. The office smelled faintly of toner. I remember that detail because everything else had gone very still in my head. By 3 o'clock, Carla had amended the filing packet and sent an emergency supplement to the court clerk. She also prepared a direct demand for disclosure of the children's location and immediate phone access. The language was restrained, formal, no emotion in it at all. That was the first real shift. Not because something dramatic happened, because paper had begun to replace uncertainty. At 3:17, she said, "Now call your command liaison." I looked at her. She said, "Not for permission, for documentation. I want a clean statement from military administration that your return date was set, that you did not seek extension, and that there is nothing in your file suggesting family abandonment. We're not asking them to intervene. We're preserving the record." So I made the call from her conference room. The liaison on duty was a captain I knew by voice, but not well by name. Efficient, careful, no wasted language. I explained only what was necessary. He listened and said, "I can provide administrative confirmation of your return orders, deployment length, and any formal leave request you submitted during the period. Nothing operational. Nothing sensitive. That's all I need. You'll have it by close of business." He sent it in 42 minutes. A plain email. Attached memorandum. Dates, orders, request history. Clear enough that anybody reading it would understand one simple fact. I had been trying to come home, not avoid it. Carla added that to the file without ceremony. Then she looked at me and said, "There's one more thing I want before the court calls this. School records." I frowned. "From our district?" "Yes. Attendance, emergency contacts, pickup authorizations, parent communication logs. If your son has had behavior issues recently, or if the school was told something untrue about you, I want that in writing." I drove there myself. The elementary and middle school shared one administration building, brick with a flat roof and a flag out front that snapped once in the wind every few seconds. It was nearly the end of the day when I walked in. The hall smelled like floor wax and pencil shavings. The front office secretary looked up, recognized me after a second, and stood. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." Her face changed immediately. Not into surprise exactly, into discomfort. That told me enough to keep my voice steady. "I need copies of any communication logs involving my children from the last 3 months, I said. "And I need to know whether the school was informed of any custody change." She glanced toward the principal's office. "Can you wait just a moment?" I said yes and stood by the counter while students' voices moved faintly through the building. Locker doors closing. A distant laugh. Shoes against tile. The principal came out 2 minutes later. He was a careful man named Richard Bell, mid-50s, tie loosened at the collar. Usually good with people, but not especially comfortable when facts arrived faster than he expected. He shook my hand and asked me into his office. Once the door closed, he said, "We were told there had been a family transition." "By whom?" "Your wife." "What exactly were you told?" He hesitated and then chose accuracy over politeness. "That you would not be returning to the household. That future contact should be routed through her. That the children were struggling emotionally with the reality that you had chosen to continue service obligations rather than resume family life." I watched him for a moment. He added, "We were also told not to surprise the children with direct outreach involving you." That sat between us for a second. Did either child repeat any of that to staff? I asked. He opened a folder on his desk. "Your son was in 2 separate conflicts over the last month. Nothing severe. But in one meeting he told the counselor that his father had decided not to come back and had picked the army over us." Those were the words noted. I looked down at the folder and then back at him. "Was there any legal paperwork provided to the school supporting a change in custody?" "No. Was I removed from emergency contacts? No. Requested, but not completed. Our registrar asked for documentation and didn't receive it. That was useful. Mr. Bell printed the communication log and the counselor note while I waited. The printer in the corner clicked and fed the pages out slowly. As he handed them over, he said quietly, "For what it's worth, your son didn't seem convinced by what he was saying. He seemed cornered." I nodded once. That matched what I already suspected. On the way out, I stopped at the counselor's office. She wasn't available, but her door had construction paper stars taped to the frame, each one labeled in a child's handwriting with things they were proud of. I stood there for half a second longer than I meant to. Then I left. Back at Carla's office, she read the school documents in silence. When she got to the counselor note, she underlined one sentence with her pen. "He picked the Army over us." She set the page down. "That's not just estrangement," she said. "That's a planted narrative." I took a seat across from her. The light outside the conference room windows had shifted warmer now. Late afternoon, a stripe of sun across the carpet. Carla stacked the school records, command memorandum, photos, and notes into one clean file, clipped it, and said, "Here's where your advantage begins." I waited. She raised one finger. "First, her story is inconsistent. She says the children need stability, but she moved them without formal notice, introduced another adult into the household, and attempted school changes without documentation." A second finger. "Second, your records are specific. Dates, requests, communications, routine parenting details. Courts trust specifics." A third finger. "Third, she has already started shaping outside institutions, school, children, neighbors, around a false account. Judges do not like that." She rested her hand on the file. "This is no longer about a marriage ending badly. It's about control over truth." That was the first time that day I felt something close to steadiness. Not hope exactly, just traction. At 5:11, the clerk called. "Emergency hearing request received. Judicial review in progress. Opposing party to be served immediately if approval issued before close." Carla thanked the clerk, hung up, and said, "Now we wait one more hour." So I stayed. She worked at her desk. I sat in the conference room with a paper cup of coffee that had gone cool 20 minutes earlier. Twice my phone buzzed with unknown numbers. I didn't answer. At 5:43, Danny sent another message. No movement from cabin. Marcus outside twice on phone. Lauren seen pacing on porch. Kids remain inside. Then, at 5:58, Carla's line rang again. She listened for less than a minute, wrote down a case number, and said, "Understood." When she hung up, she looked through the glass wall at me and motioned me in. "The judge granted limited emergency relief," she said. "Not full custody yet, but enough." I sat down. She slid the order across the table. Temporary restriction on removal of the children from Broward County. Immediate disclosure of current address. Mandatory phone access between me and the children by 8 p.m. Notice of hearing set for the next morning at 9:30. Service authorized tonight. I read it once, then again more slowly. The words didn't feel emotional on the page. Just exact. That helped. "Who serves it?" I asked. "I have someone," Carla said. "Retired deputy. Very professional. She knows how to deal with difficult people without turning it into theater." "Will they comply?" "They don't have to like it," Carla said. "They just have to receive it." At 6:20, the process server arrived in person to pick up the packet. Her name was Denise Holloway. Mid-60s, compact build, gray hair pulled back, navy windbreakers zipped to the collar. She carried herself like somebody who had spent years standing in doorways while other people made bad decisions. Carla briefed her in 10 flat sentences. Cabin address. Parties involved. Minor children present. Third-party male occupant. Judicial order enclosed. Phone access required by 8. Hearing notice for morning. Return of service needed tonight. Denise asked 2 questions. Any history of weapons? None documented. Any reason to think they'll run if they spot me first? Carla glanced at me, then back at her. Yes. Denise nodded. Then I go now. After she left, the office quieted again. At 7:03, Danny called. "Marcus just loaded 2 bags into the SUV," he said. "Could be bluff. Could be prep." I related to Carla. She phoned Denise immediately and updated her while walking to the window. At 7:19, Denise texted Carla that she was in position near the property and waiting for a clean approach. At 7:41, another text. Vehicle still in drive. Front lights on. Approaching now. I stood without realizing I had done it. Carla said, "Sit. Let the process work." So I did. Then I waited. At 7:58, Carla's phone rang. She answered on speaker. It was Denise. "Service complete," she said. "Hostile but complete. Wife accepted documents after refusing twice. Male subject attempted to interfere verbally. I informed him the order applied regardless of his opinion. Children were visible inside. No sign of immediate flight." Carla asked, "Was the phone access order explained clearly?" "Yes. I stated it twice in front of both adults." "Anything else?" A short pause. Then Denise said, "The boy heard his father's name and came into the hallway fast. Woman tried to block line of sight. Didn't work. I kept my expression still." Denise added, "He looked relieved." The call ended. No one said anything for a few seconds. Then, at exactly 8:06, my phone rang. "Lauren." Carla pointed to the speaker button. I answered and set the phone on the table. Her breathing was audible before she spoke. "You had no right to do this in front of them." "My right came from the order you were handed," I said. Marcus's voice cut in from farther away. "Don't answer anything else. Put it on mute." Lauren ignored him. "You blindsided the children." I looked at the order in front of me. "No," I said. "You did." Silence. Then a rustle, a muffled exchange, and a different sound. A small voice. "Dad, my son." I kept my voice level. "Yeah, I'm here." Another silence, but this one felt different. Not resistance, just the sound of someone checking whether the floor under him was real. Then he said, very quietly, "Mom said you weren't coming back." "I know. Were you trying to call?" "Yes." Behind him I could hear movement. Somebody whispering. A chair leg against wood. Then he asked the one question that mattered most. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at Carla. She gave the smallest nod. So I answered the way truth usually works best. "I did tell you," I said. "I kept trying. We'll go through all of it soon. But I'm back now." He didn't cry. Neither did I. He just breathed into the phone for a second and said, "Okay." Then I heard my daughter in the background asking if it was really me. Lauren came back on the line almost immediately after that, too quickly. "That's enough for tonight." "It's not enough," I said, "but it's a start." She exhaled sharply. Then Carla reached over, pressed the mute button for me, and wrote 3 words on her legal pad. "Don't fill silence." So I didn't. A moment later, Lauren disconnected the call herself. Carla made a note of the time, 8:11 p.m. Then she looked at me and said, "Tomorrow morning, we stop talking about stories and start talking about evidence." I gathered the papers, slid them into the folder, and stood. Outside, the city had gone dark except for streetlights and the glow from storefront windows across the block. My car was parked under a maple tree with half its leaves already starting to turn. As I opened the driver's door, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. No greeting, no name, just one line. "If you push this, you're going to learn things about your wife you can't fix." I looked at the message for a few seconds. Then I took a screenshot, forwarded it to Carla and Danny, and put the phone face down. Then I drove home. I was back at Carla's office by 8:15 the next morning. The air outside had turned colder overnight. One of those clean mornings where every sound seems more defined than usual. Car doors shutting, shoes on pavement, a delivery truck idling at the curb. I carried the same folder in with 2 new additions, the screenshot of the anonymous text and a handwritten note I had made after the phone call with my son. Carla was already in the conference room with a yellow pad, a legal binder, and a stack of copies set into neat piles. She didn't ask how I slept. She just said, "We have 90 minutes. Sit down." I did. Then she turned the yellow pad toward me. She had written 3 lines across the top. Step 1, lock the timeline. Step 2, narrow the issue. Step 3, let them overstate. I read it once and looked up. Carla tapped the first line. Step 1, we fixed the sequence so tightly that nobody can blur it. You returned. House empty. Note left. Neighbor confirms move. School contacted. Children relocated. Emergency order served. Child confirms he was told you weren't coming back. Then the second line. Step 2, we do not chase every moral failure in this room. We narrow the issue to what the court can act on quickly. Interference, misrepresentation, and instability created around the children. Then the third. Step 3, we let them talk too much. That last part made sense immediately. People who were cornered often mistook explanation for control. They kept talking because they thought volume could replace accuracy. I had seen it before in different settings. Carla handed me a fresh sheet of paper. Write down every sentence you will allow yourself to say if you're addressed directly. I thought for a second, then wrote, yes. No, I don't know. That's not correct. I have documentation. Carla read it, nodded once, and said, good. No speeches. No visible injury. No trying to be understood. She clicked that page to the inside of the file. By 8:40, Denise Holloway arrived with the return of service. Signed, time-stamped, complete. She set it on the table and gave a brief factual summary of the evening before. Lauren had tried not to open the door at first. Marcus had come into view within seconds. The children had been visible behind the hallway archway. The order had been explained twice. The service had been completed at 7:54 p.m. No drama in how Denise said any of it. Just sequence and observation. Carla added the return to the top of the binder. At 9:05, we walked across the street to the courthouse. County building. Limestone steps. Brass door handles polished by years of use. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of paper, old heating vents, and floor polish. The fluorescent lights flattened everything a little. People lowered their voices without being told to. I had been in plenty of official buildings before, but courtrooms had their own rhythm. Less urgency than command offices. More waiting. More silence that mattered. Carla checked us in with the clerk, then led me to a bench outside courtroom B. Lauren and Marcus arrived 11 minutes later. I saw them before they saw me. Lauren looked tired in a way that makeup couldn't cover. Not fragile, just stretched thin. Her coat was buttoned wrong at the collar, and she kept touching the strap of her purse like she needed her hands occupied. Marcus walked half a step in front of her, carrying himself with the familiar confidence of somebody who had never had to sit still while other people decided things. He spotted me first. Then his posture changed, just slightly. Not fear. Not yet. More that he had expected a different kind of man waiting for him. Maybe louder. Maybe easier to misread. I didn't stand. I didn't nod. I just stayed where I was. Lauren looked at me for a second longer than Marcus did. Her expression moved through several things too quickly to separate. Surprise, resentment, calculation, maybe some embarrassment under it. Then Carla leaned toward me and said quietly, "Do not rescue them from their own choices." That stayed with me. Their attorney came a minute later. Not a senior partner. A younger man in a charcoal suit with a polished briefcase and the cautious look of someone who had been handed a difficult file late. He spoke to Lauren and Marcus near the far wall. I watched Marcus do most of the talking. At 9:27, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. We went in. Emergency hearings are usually short, but they don't feel short while you're in them. Time changes when every sentence can move something important. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Eleanor Price. Direct eyes, measured voice, no visible patience for performance. That helped. Once everyone was seated, she looked at the file, confirmed appearances, and said, "We are here on emergency motions involving minor children, disputed relocation, and alleged interference with parental access. I will hear the movement first." Carla stood. Her tone was even from the first word. No drama. No adjectives she didn't need. She walked the judge through the timeline exactly the way she had laid it out for me. My deployment and return date. The empty home. The note left behind. The neighbor's observations. The lack of legal notice regarding relocation. The school communication suggesting I had abandoned the family. The transfer inquiry in another county. The emergency order. The forced phone access in which my son directly confirmed he had been told I was not coming back. She introduced the command memorandum and school records. Then the service return. Then my notes taken immediately after Lauren's phone call. Then the investigator's affidavit in limited form, carefully framed as third-party observations confirming location, not some dramatic surveillance story. The judge listened without interruption. Only once did she interject. "Was there any custody order in place before the mother relocated?" Carla answered, "No, Your Honor." "Any written agreement allowing relocation?" "No." Judge Price made a note. Then Lauren's attorney rose. He did the thing I expected. He widened the frame. Talked about strain on military families. Emotional distance. Household instability. Adjustment. claimed Lauren had been trying to protect the children from confusion after a marriage that had already broken down in substance, if not on paper. Suggested she believed the move was temporary and in their best interests. That was exactly the kind of language Carla had predicted. Broad, soft at the edges, hard to pin down. Then Marcus made his first mistake. He whispered something to Lauren's attorney, who then said, "There is also concern that Mr. Carter's recent return from deployment may involve stress responses not yet fully understood by the family." Carla didn't move. I didn't move either. The judge looked up. "Is there any evidence before me supporting that suggestion?" she asked. The younger attorney hesitated. "Not formal evidence, Your Honor, but—" Judge Price cut him off. "Then don't imply what you cannot support." The room went very quiet after that. He tried to recover by reframing everything as a misunderstanding. A hurried move. A mother under stress. Children needing consistency. Then Carla stood again. "With the court's permission," she said, "I'd like to narrow this." Judge Price nodded. Carla walked to the lectern with one document in hand. "This case does not require the court today to determine the full quality of this marriage. It requires the court to determine whether the children were removed from their father without notice, whether false information was given to institutions and possibly to the children themselves, and whether the current environment is stable enough to justify continuation." She lifted the school record. The child counselor note reflects the son stating, quote, "He picked the Army over us." That language mirrors exactly what the mother told the school. Then the command memorandum. This administrative record shows the father asked repeatedly to return sooner. Then the order and service return. And despite a direct judicial order requiring immediate phone access, that access occurred only after formal service at the residence where the mother had concealed the children. No raised voice. No flourish. Just structure. The judge asked Lauren's attorney, "Does your client dispute that she informed the school the father would not be returning to the household?" He looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at Marcus. That took maybe a second and a half. Too long. Finally, the attorney said, "She may have conveyed her understanding of the situation during a period of emotional strain." The judge's pen stopped moving. "That is not an answer," she said. Carla didn't even look at me. She didn't need to. This was the moment where silence did the work. Lauren's attorney tried one more turn. He argued that the children were physically safe, cared for, and with their mother, and that no actual harm had been intended. Judge Price folded her hands and asked, "Is Mr. Hale residing in the same home as the children?" The younger attorney hesitated again. Marcus spoke before he should have. "I've been helping out." His lawyer closed his eyes for half a second. The judge looked directly at Marcus. "You are not a party to this case. Do not speak again." Then she turned back to Lauren's attorney. "Answer the question." This time he had to. "Yes, Your Honor." That answer mattered more than it sounded like it did. I could feel it. Third-party adult in the residence. No prior order. No notice. False framing to school. Restricted access to me. It all tightened at once. Judge Price asked a few more questions, all of them precise. Had Lauren offered me direct contact before the emergency order? No. Had the children remained enrolled in their original district at the moment of hearing? Technically, yes, but transfer inquiry had been initiated. Had Lauren informed the school I was choosing military obligations over family life? Her attorney would only say that she had expressed concerns consistent with her understanding. Again, not a denial. The hearing ended the way emergency matters often do. Not with resolution, but with the court drawing sharper boundaries. Judge Price ruled from the bench. The children were to remain in this county pending full hearing. I was granted immediate temporary parenting time beginning that same day in a structured reunification setting. Lauren was prohibited from making further statements to schools or third parties suggesting I had abandoned the children. Marcus Hale was not to be present during any exchanges or contact involving the children until further review. Both parties were ordered to preserve all written communications. A full evidentiary hearing would follow. Then the judge added one more thing. "Mr. and Ms. Carter, this court is not interested in adult narratives built around hurt feelings. It is interested in what was done, what was said to the children, and whether either parent placed personal interests ahead of their stability. I suggest both sides proceed accordingly." That was the closest thing to a warning anybody needed. Outside the courtroom, people moved back into hallway life almost immediately. Shoes on tile. Low voices. Papers exchanged. a vending machine humming near the elevators. Lauren came out first with her attorney. Marcus followed, jaw tight, walking too fast for a courthouse hallway. He glanced at me once like he wanted an argument to happen in public so he could shape it. I didn't give him one. Carla touched my sleeve lightly and guided me toward the clerk's counter instead. That was another kind of lesson. You don't meet confusion in the hallway when the order is still warm in your hand. You move to the next step. The structured reunification was set for 2 p.m. at a family services office 3 blocks away. Neutral site. Small meeting room. Licensed facilitator present. Carla looked at the clock. "We have 4 hours," she said. "Use them well." "How?" "Food. Water. Quiet. No rehearsing speeches in your head." I nodded. "And Ben," she added, "when you see your children, do not start with explanations." That made sense too. Children rarely need the whole file first. They need to know what is true right now. I walked back to my car under a sky that had gone pale and bright by noon. On the passenger seat sat the binder, thicker now with stamped orders and courtroom notes. I placed it carefully on the floorboard instead. Then I drove to a diner a few blocks from the courthouse. The place had cracked vinyl booths, a pie case near the register, and the smell of coffee that had probably lived in the walls for years. The waitress brought me eggs and toast I barely touched. I drank water, then coffee, then more water. At one point I took out my notebook and wrote down 3 things only. "I'm here. I came back. You did nothing wrong." That was enough. At 1:18, Danny slid into the booth across from me without needing an invitation. He had driven in that morning and looked exactly the same as he always did when something serious was moving. Calm eyes, tired jacket, one hand around a paper cup like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "How'd it go?" "Temporary boundaries," I said. "Enough to start." He nodded. That's usually how the real work begins. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a printed call log summary, a few public records on Marcus, and one photo I hadn't seen before. Marcus outside a restaurant, 6 months earlier, with another woman I didn't recognize. Married, according to the notation Danny had written beneath it in pen. Pattern evidence. Not for a hallway argument. For later. I slid it back into the envelope. Then I put the phone face down. At 1:47, Carla texted me the room number for the family services office. I left cash on the table, stood, and walked out into the cold sunlight. 3 blocks later, I was in a waiting room with muted paint, children's books on a low shelf, and a table lamp giving off warmer light than the overhead fixtures. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear a copier and the soft murmur of 2 voices behind a closed door. A woman in a navy cardigan came out with a clipboard and introduced herself as the reunification facilitator. She shook my hand and said, "I've read the order. I'll bring them in shortly. Keep your voice steady. Let them lead where they can." I said I understood. Then she asked, "Do you want a minute alone before they come in?" I looked at the closed hallway behind her. "Yes," I said. She nodded and stepped away. I sat down in the small room by myself. There was a box of tissues on the side table, 2 chairs angled toward a couch, and a framed watercolor of a shoreline on the far wall. Somebody had tried hard to make the room feel non-threatening. It mostly worked. I rested my hands on my knees and listened to the building settle around me. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Small ones first. Then I waited. The door opened a few seconds later. My daughter came in first. She had on a yellow sweatshirt I recognized and leggings with one knee slightly faded from wear. Her hair was tied back too tight, the way Lauren did it when mornings ran late. She stopped just inside the room and looked at me without moving. Then my son stepped in behind her. He had grown while I was gone. Not enough to be startling, but enough that I noticed it all at once in the shoulders and the way he held himself. He was trying to look steady for his sister. I could see that immediately. The facilitator stayed by the door and said, softly, "You can take your time." I stood, but only halfway, and stopped. I didn't move toward them yet. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded calm. I was glad for that. My daughter stared at me for 1 second more, then crossed the room fast and wrapped both arms around my waist hard enough to take the air out of me a little. I put one hand gently against the back of her head and the other between her shoulder blades. She was shaking, not sobbing, just shaking in small bursts like she had been holding too much and too tight for too long. My son stayed where he was for a second, then came closer at a slower pace. When I looked at him, he nodded once, like we were agreeing to something without saying it. I reached out, and put a hand on the back of his neck for a moment, and he let me. That was enough. We sat down after that. My daughter stayed close against my side on the couch. My son took the chair across from us, knees apart, hands together, trying hard to look older than he was. The facilitator sat near the door with her clipboard lowered in her lap. Present, but not intrusive. For a little while nobody rushed the room. I asked if they'd eaten lunch. My daughter said yes. My son shrugged and said, sort of. I asked about school. He said he still hated math. My daughter said she had a loose tooth and then immediately checked with her tongue to make sure it was still loose. Normal things first. That mattered. After a minute or two, my son looked directly at me and asked, "Did you know where we were?" "Not at first," I said. "Then I found out." "Why didn't you come get us sooner?" His tone wasn't accusing. It was careful. He was asking for shape, not blame. So I gave him shape. "I came home and the house was empty," I said. "I found the note. I got help. Then I started doing this the right way so nobody could keep me from you once I got to you." He looked down at his hands. Then he nodded. My daughter leaned back enough to see my face and asked, "Were you really coming home before?" "Yes." "Mom said maybe you changed your mind." I didn't. That answer sat cleanly in the room. No speech after it. No explaining too much. Just the truth where they could see it. My son looked up again. "Did you call?" "Yes." "Did you send stuff?" "Yes." He swallowed once and said, quieter, "We didn't get most of it." I believed him immediately. "I know," I said. That was the first moment I saw his face really change. Not into relief exactly. More like the effort of holding two different stories in his head had finally started to ease. He asked, "So you didn't stay away on purpose?" "No." My daughter pressed closer into my side again. Then she said something small and direct in the way children sometimes do. "I knew that didn't sound like you." I closed my eyes for about half a second and then opened them again. "Thank you," I said. The facilitator still hadn't written anything for the last minute or two. She was just listening, letting the room settle on its own. A little later, she stood and asked if the kids wanted water or a snack. My daughter asked for crackers. My son said no. The facilitator stepped into the hallway. That gave us a short pocket of quiet. My son leaned forward in the chair and lowered his voice. "He's there a lot," he said. "Marcus." He nodded. "He acts like he owns everything. The cabin, the rules, even the dock." I let him say it. "He keeps telling Mom what to do," my son continued. "And then later he acts like it was her idea." That was useful, but I didn't react to it beyond listening. My daughter added, "He moved your tackle box." I looked at her. "At the cabin," she said. "From the hall closet. You put it in the garage." That detail, for some reason, hit me harder than larger things might have. Not because of the box itself, because it meant he had been settling in, rearranging, touching things that were still part of our family life and treating them like abandoned property. I kept my face still and asked, "Did either of you ever tell your mom you didn't want to go there?" Both of them nodded. My son answered for both of them. She said it was temporary. Then later she said this was our life now and we had to help make it work. I looked at him for a second. "Did she say I wasn't coming back?" He nodded again. "More than once." "Yes." "Did she say why?" He hesitated. Then he said, "She said you chose the army. And then later she said you had the chance to come home, but you didn't take it." I didn't correct every piece. Not in that moment. I just said, "That wasn't true." "I know," he said. That word mattered. The facilitator came back in with a paper cup of water, a juice box, and a packet of crackers. No one mentioned the shift in conversation. That was part of her skill, I think. Knowing when not to interrupt what had already started doing its own work. We had about 40 minutes together before the next stage. The court had also ordered a limited adult conference in the same building, separate room, same facilitator available if needed. Carla had explained it to me in the waiting room. The goal was practical structure, not emotional repair. Ground rules for contact, exchange process, what the children needed right now. No revisiting the marriage. No personal arguments. No speeches. I had agreed to that before I walked in. At 2:52, the facilitator checked the time and told the children she was going to bring in Ms. Sutton so we could transition carefully. My daughter didn't like that. She put both hands around my forearm and asked, "Are you leaving again?" "No," I said. "I'm right here." That was the only answer she needed. Carla came in a minute later. She crouched slightly to talk to both kids at eye level and introduced herself simply as someone helping make sure adults followed the rules. My son seemed to like that framing. Then the facilitator told me it was time for the adult session. I stood, and this time my son stood with me. He didn't hug me again. He just said, "Don't let them change it." "I won't," I said. He nodded once. Then I left the room. The conference room for the adult session was planed in a deliberate way. Rectangular table. For chairs. Box of tissues nobody had touched. Legal pads stacked at one end. The blinds half open, letting in a flat stripe of afternoon light. Lauren was already there with her attorney. Marcus was not. That was the first useful sign. The court order had kept him out, and for once he had not pushed past it. Lauren looked up when I entered. Her face had that look people get when they've slept very little and spent the last 12 hours trying to hold together a version of events that no longer stands on its own. Carla sat to my left. The facilitator sat near the head of the table. Lauren's attorney began by saying, "This is an interim conference intended to reduce tension and improve cooperation pending the next hearing." Carla said, "Agreed." Then everyone looked at me and Lauren, mostly to confirm we understood why we were there. I said, "Understood." Lauren said, "Yes." The facilitator laid out the rules in a clear voice. No interrupting. No accusations. Speak in terms of current child needs only. Either side could pause the meeting if it drifted. Then she turned to Lauren first. "What do the children need this week?" Lauren took a breath and started in the wrong place. "They need stability after being pulled back and forth." The facilitator raised a hand gently. "Current needs," she repeated. "Practical." Lauren stopped. Then she said, "Routine, school attendance, familiar clothes, and school materials. Their medications. Their comfort items." That was better. Carla wrote those down. Then the facilitator turned to me. "What do the children need this week?" I answered without looking at Lauren. "Predictable contact. Clear information. No negative statements about either parent in front of them. School continuity. Access to their belongings. And no third-party involvement in adult decisions around them." Lauren shifted in her seat. Her attorney put a hand flat on the table, not touching her, just close enough to signal restraint. The facilitator wrote for a moment, then asked Lauren, "Can you provide all school items, medications, and personal belongings by this evening?" Lauren said yes. "Can you agree not to tell the children their father abandoned them, chose duty over them, or otherwise did not intend to return?" That question put the whole room into a different kind of quiet. Lauren looked at the table, then at me, then back at the table. Her attorney spoke first. "My client can agree to avoid characterizations that create distress." Carla said, "That is not specific enough." The facilitator nodded. "I need a direct answer." Lauren swallowed once. Then she said, "Yes." The facilitator asked, "Can you agree not to involve Mr. Hale in any communication with the children about their father?" Lauren's face tightened, but only for a moment. "Yes." That was the second useful sign. Rules stated plainly are hard to wriggle out of later. The meeting might have stayed there if not for what happened next. The facilitator asked one more simple question. "Is there anything the children have been told that should be corrected now to reduce confusion?" Lauren put both hands together on the table and stared at them for a second. When she spoke, her voice was lower than before. "I may have told them things too early. Or too absolutely." Carla said nothing. "Neither did I." The facilitator asked, such as, Lauren's attorney leaned toward her like he might stop her, but she had already started. "That Ben wasn't coming back to the house," she said. "That he had chosen the military over the family. That moving was going to be permanent." I looked at her and waited. She kept going, maybe because silence leaves people alone with what they've already admitted. I thought if I made it sound settled, the kids would stop hoping for something different. The room stayed still. Then I said the only thing I needed to say. It wasn't settled. No heat in it. No debate. Just reality, where everyone could hear it. Lauren looked at me, and for the first time since I'd returned, she didn't seem angry so much as confronted by the plainness of what she had done. Her attorney cleared his throat and tried to redirect. My client was under strain and trying to manage the children's expectations in a difficult transition. Carla answered before I had to, by telling them their father chose not to return.